as to why I'm making a system that doesn't reflect the Ten Commandments. Because the Mormon missionaries once asked me this, and I thought it was a very interesting question, is why is my system not deliberately not going to reflect the Ten Commandments in its legal code and politics and economics and all that? And the reason is because give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God's. And, throughout Jesus' sermons, he continuously remarked that you don't overthrow governments. That the government is a totally separate entity. It basically doesn't have anything to do with God. It's totally separate. There is a separation between church and state. There is a total separation, total severance in between what is spiritual and what is political. And the reason is because politics governs what we do with our physical bodies. It has to do with the physical world and empirical phenomena, acts and things like that. God has to deal with intent. God has to deal with what's in your heart, in your spirit, in your soul. Because when the body is stripped away, and it will be, the only thing that will be left is the soul. And wherever the soul happens to be, that's where it's going to stay for a relative eternity until it reincarnates into a new body. But as far as the soul is concerned, it's going to spend a timeless epoch, an eternity, in whatever state that it happened to be in when it was released from its body. Because the body is what is sustaining and grounding the mind. And so the mind won't have the body anymore. It will only have the soul, or maybe nothing. So then the mind is going to relate the soul back to nothing, or what is the absence of the body. So I guess you could say nothing if you don't believe in God, but you could also say that the absence of the physical body might be the soul, or God, and that's whose presence the mind is measuring the soul against. So I guess at death there would be the soul, and then the mind would act like the mirror, and then it's going to reflect the soul back to itself. And the way that the mirror is oriented is the way that the soul appears to itself. So it can be tilted. It can be oriented toward darkness. And so then it'll see all the dark parts of itself, and that would be hell. Or it could be pointed toward God and see all the good parts of itself and be in heaven. And everything in between. And that's a very colorful landscape. I mean, that means that everyone's hell is unique. It's all endemic to that person's soul. It's not going to be something that anyone could describe specifically to anyone else, because the specifics are going to depend upon which soul it is that we're talking about, because that's the soul that gets reflected. And also their mind, their paradigm, is what's going to determine the way that their soul gets reflected back to themselves. So, yeah, it can be extremely intense and very rich if the mirror is very polished and very large. Then it's going to have an extremely good resolution, which will intensify the reflection. But if the mind is small and undeveloped, then the soul will have a mild reflection and it won't be that big of a deal. So it isn't to say that intellect equals depth, but it is to say that the intellect allows for depth, that it gives a greater intensity than would otherwise be experienced. In other words, a dog or a cat is going to go to a milder place than a human. A human will typically, on average, go to some place that's far more intense than the experience that a dog or a cat would have after their bodies die. Now, some of the things that we believe, we are not honest with ourselves about. We may say or profess a belief in Christ when we really harbor a deep sentiment that that's not actually true. So it isn't enough to say that I believe such and such. It's written into the person's intentions, not necessarily their actions or their speech, although those often, if they're being authentic, come from the soul too. But oftentimes people are not authentic and they're not being true to themselves or each other, and they're lying either to themselves or someone else, and they create masks, or they hide, or they tone it down, or over-exaggerate, or tilt it, or distort it. So it's not really possible for a person in life to know what their own mind is, because it's like the hand trying to touch itself. It can't, or the eye trying to see itself, or the ear trying to hear itself. It just doesn't, there's not enough there for it to happen. So, none of us will ever know what awaits us at death, but I believe that it isn't quite so fortuitous that we will find ourselves in a dreamless slumber. It might be that way, but then again it might not. And if our sleep at death is filled with dreams, they can either be good dreams or they can be nightmares, or they can just not have any dreams at all. And those are the three states that I believe people will go to, and that depends on which absolute they're oriented toward. If they go to hell, they're oriented toward nothing. There's an addiction to certainty in that, and an intolerance, and a judgment, an unforgiving, unmerciful, very precise judgment. And that is all the bad things that you've ever done reflected back to you in saying, you are not a good person after all. You don't deserve heaven. You don't deserve forgiveness. You will be judged, and it's by your own conscience. Now, a lot of people might think, well, what about a psychopath that doesn't have a conscience? They do have a conscience. Do you think that they want to be grouped in with the rest of us that quote unquote have a conscience or profess to believe in a conscience? No, they scoff at it. Why? Because they don't want to be seen as someone who has one. So there you go. They do have a conscience. It's just that it's been changed as far as its orientation to point towards something other than compassion and empathy in relationships, and towards something more like the ability to exist without any dependence upon any other person, socially, emotionally, financially, etc. They want total freedom for themselves, irregardless of whether it costs someone else theirs. And so that will lead to hell, because it's a belief that you won't be able to survive based off of your own merits unless you have no help from anyone else and you survive. Then you're not worth shit. And when you get confronted with your own death, with nothing, there really isn't anyone there to save you. So you'll end up with being confronted with nothing. You'll judge nothing to be superior because it doesn't require any help. It just creates itself. And then you'll get subsumed and absorbed in that, in the nothing, and you'll be compressed and crushed into oblivion. And that's focusing on all the dark parts of oneself, all the reasons that one cannot survive nothing, that one cannot be fully integrated. It's kind of like Saul Alinsky's rule for radicals in his book, that no one ever lives up to their own standards. No one ever completely lives up to their own standards. So even if their standards are psychopathic, you'd think, well, that's the lowest bar there is. Surely they make it past that simply just by being themselves. That's not true. Most, if not all, of those psychopaths are in hell already, and they judge themselves. They don't say this, but they do judge themselves, and that's why they've been stripped of everything except a machine. And when that gets broken and that dies, they have nothing. There is nothing there. They're hollow. There's no room for any compassion, even to themselves. So there is a hell that awaits people that are like that, even if people like me forget that that's the case. It is the case, and they will burn for an eternity because of that. And then there's kind of a purgatory of sorts, which is limbo. It's just dreamless sleep. It's orienting towards indiscernibility, to say, I don't really know. I'm agnostic about the whole thing. I don't really pass judgment, good or bad, on anything. I don't make a judgment. I just avoid even having that discussion or conversation. I have the humility of realizing that I'm not God, that I'm not the arbiter of all truth, but I also have enough sanity not to judge myself or anyone else because I don't have enough information to do so. And that kind of a lukewarm detachment from everything, placid sort of existence, is a dreamless sleep. And when you die, you go to the demiurge, you go to the field of indiscernibility, and you just don't dream. You just kind of exist in a limbo state for an eternity, which I call ceasing, where you just cease, you just stop. There's no more doing anything, you're just asleep. And you're not dreaming either, you're just sleeping. As if time weren't real, and space weren't real, and you weren't real, and nothing was real, and you just kind of float for a while. And you're not aware of anything, so it's as if it never happened. But just like with sleeping, time passes outside you, but not in you, because there are no changes in you, because you're not dreaming, you're just sleeping. So internally, if you choose the demiurge, you just skip. You skip the afterlife, and you only have your next reincarnation. Which is kind of ironic, because it's almost like God has constructed everything in such a way that he won't allow you to skip. Like, you have to make up your mind. If you do skip, the next thing that you get is your new body. So you go from body instantly, from your own perspective, to another body. But you don't have any awareness between because of the sleeping, because you went to sleep. All you know is that you woke up in some body, as if you had just first been born. Oh, I just woke up here, and I found myself here. So if you bitch out, then you wake up as if nothing had ever happened to you before. You're like, oh, how did I get here? And then you have to go through the whole thing again, and you'll either just continuously do that, life after life, or eventually you'll wobble one way or the other, and you'll say either existence is a pile of shit, and I hate it, and I judge it, and I say it's not worth crap, it's not worth it to exist, or I say it is worth it to exist, and I appreciate existence, and I like it here. In your soul, not just in your mind, not in your speech, not in your actions, but in your soul, in your actual wanting, in your actual desire. And that's something that can't really be directly manipulated. You can tell yourself, you can talk to yourself mentally, you can say, I recognize such and such and so and blah, 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 and you can even manipulate your own behavior and say, I'm going to change this about myself and blah, 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 and on and on. But that doesn't ever necessitate that the soul actually changes. It has to change on its own. And that is something that naturally happens through the process of understanding and learning and repentance. So when you do stop doing an action, you'll start to realize things that you hadn't realized before. Like when I stopped smoking cigarettes, and I realized that things have a better taste that I didn't think about before, didn't experience before when I was smoking. That I don't get as sick as often from nicotine withdrawals. I don't cough so much, and if I do cough, then it's like, I don't know, it's a different kind of a cough. It's like releasing instead of it drowning. So there's things like that that will confer their benefits because of changes in behavior, and that will then brighten your mood and brighten your soul. But it isn't a direct linkage. It's not like because I stop smoking I instantly feel better. It's that if I continuously stop smoking, then slowly I accumulate these benefits, And then if I choose to go further in my soul and say, I appreciate those benefits more than I appreciate the smoking, then I get conferred the spiritual benefit. But I could just as easily not accept the benefits and say that the benefit of being able to taste my food isn't nearly as good as the pleasure that I get from smoking a cigarette. At which point, I won't have changed, and I'll eventually relapse and go smoke a cigarette if I do that. So, ultimately, it's not that life is a test, but if you looked at it like that, you wouldn't quite be wrong, but you wouldn't be right either. It's like, it's kind of like a test, but it's not. Life is an interim in between eternities. So you've got just a few moments in the waiting room as you're moving between one room and another. And you're like, given just barely enough time to sit there and wonder to yourself, why the hell am I here? What am I doing in this waiting room? Why did I ever get here? Who put me here? Did I put myself here? Yeah. And you're like, what the fuck's going on? But eventually, you run out of time and your number gets called and they say, okay, next. And then you got to go up to the window and see what they're going to give you at the pharmacy market. The doctor's office. The doctor will see you now. And so then you got to go through and you got to see what you're doing there, because there's really no one there. No one's in the lobby. No one's really answering any of your questions, and everybody's just sort of sitting around reading magazines, looking at their own shit. And some of them are loud and obnoxious and annoy the fuck out of you. And if you tell them to shut the hell up, there's no there's no security to back you up, and half the people just don't give a goddamn anyway. And and that's the life that we live here. So, am I going to go to hell because I build this political system? No. My going to hell or heaven is not determined upon what kind of a building that I build, or what kind of actions that I commit, or even what I think that I believe. It has to do with what my intent is. And it's just the way that it is. It's something that is like unquestionably obvious, self-evident to everyone about, am I really doing the right thing or not? And you know when you aren't, and you'll feel it, and it'll viscerally hurt you when you're doing something that you know you shouldn't do. And when you are doing something that you know you should be doing, then you'll feel at ease and feel safe and secure in that. And especially when you go back and you critically think about things and you process it just using mental abstractions, you can usually tease out some patterns, and you can start to say, I'm not as good of a person as I like to tell myself that I am. I don't really have the right to judge this other person that I like to judge, because it just seems so easy. Come on, get with the program. Isn't it just so obvious? But yet, there's so much wrong with me that I don't see, that isn't obvious to me, that other people think is obvious. So I might be right about Bob's wart, but he's right about my freckle. It's the same thing. I just can't see my own freckle, but I can sure as fuck see his wart, and then that's how we always end up in these conflicts. So it then bolsters the idea that, yes, indeed, the soul does need to be at peace and at rest and in security and safety, and not attacking or feeling like it's being attacked. It just doesn't like opposition. It shouldn't oppose or be opposed. It should accept and be accepted, and things like that. And so it's okay to build a political system that is even against God's commandments, because again, give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's. Caesar may ask for a Christian to martyr their own body and sacrifice their body to Caesar, okay? But my soul belongs to God. There is no way to have Caesar take that. It's impossible. He can't do anything to take it unless I give it to him. But that's the thing, is Caesar can be very convincing. And I often worry that I have given unto Caesar what is God's, and given unto God what is Caesar's, or nothing at all. So I have to remind myself that I am not in a position that I can judge myself, but thankfully I can use discernment to judge what Jesus said and then try to apply that to myself. And what he said was pretty simple. The government is the government, and God is God, and there is no overlap. It's, this is over here and that's over there, and they're not good versus evil. They're not right versus wrong. They're not Democrat versus Republican or rich versus poor. It's just totally separate. It just doesn't have anything to do with the other thing. In the same way that my ass doesn't have anything to do with raising chickens. It's just not a part of it. Now, I could pretend that its role is to give manure to the grass and the things that feed the insects that the chickens eat, and therefore my ass has something to do with raising chickens, but that's just forced in there. It's not logically necessary that my ass has anything to do with raising chickens. And in the same way, it isn't necessary that God has anything to do with raising his children in the political system versus in the spiritual system. Because God doesn't raise us up politically. He doesn't raise us up objectively. He raises us up spiritually. And if the spirit was the same thing as the body, and that's how God raised us, was through the body, well, our body dies. So then I guess our soul just dies with it, since it's the same thing and they're interchangeable. That's why I draw such a stark distinction between the soul and the mind and the body, is because the body dies. So if the body dies and it's the same thing as my soul, then I die when my body dies. And I just don't believe that. I oftentimes wish it was the case. It would be comforting to think that I just didn't exist anymore, that I just snapped out of existence, and that, the rest of you take it from here and I'm out. And I don't have to worry about hell, but I also don't have anything to look forward to as far as heaven is concerned. My only concern is right here, right now. That would be very comforting, because I can deal with right here, right now. I can't deal with eternity. I can't deal with God. I can't deal with heaven and hell. Heaven would be too intense. Hell would be undeserved and horrifying, and I wouldn't learn anything from it. All it would do is just make me, in pain. So the only thing that I can think of that would really be fair would be a dreamless sleep. It would just, you just get allowed to quit the field. You're done. Thank you for your time. Go home. Nice to have you here, but everybody's got to leave the party sometime, and you just leave, and the meaning stays in creation and reality, not with me. And then I just go off, and there's just no more, and it's done. The movie ends. The people leave the theater. There's nothing else to see. And it's not just like eternal blackness and eternal silence. It's not even that. It's just nothing. It's just that it just ends. It's just no more. That would be the only real fair thing that I could think of that would await us all at the end of our lives, because that's equal for everyone, and none of us know enough to be able to ascend or descend. So I think that is really the only fair way to play it. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is fair for people to go to heaven, and that God has some way of justifying this that I'm not aware of. Like he loves us, and he just wants what's best for us, even if we don't deserve it. So maybe I just don't even need to beat myself up about following the Ten Commandments and all that. I don't know. But I know that I'm not going to get judged for my politics.